on the slides in the webinar. So what we'll do now is we'll get straight into it and give you a bit of an idea of what we're going to cover tonight. Our aim for tonight is to talk through the back in the game kind of campaign that we kind of launched, soft launched after the Pitch Up for Rugby event in September last year. So during kind of October, November, there's a few things floating around our social media channels. And based on some kind of feedback from the game, which we'll go through in the early part in that player feedback section, we're trying to amplify that campaign now just to target a few kind of segments of our playing population to try and encourage them either back into rugby, or if they're already back in, to try and keep them playing a little bit more regularly and try and up the number of matches completed. What we'll do is give you a bit of an idea of, why we're doing it, what's the reason, what's the problem we're trying to solve. We'll also talk through how we're going to roll the campaign and give you some ideas about how you can get involved with that in your club. Just pause there and just say it's great to see so many clubs on there and different clubs, and the type of people is perfect that you're on. And then thankfully we've got Martin on, who'll kind of save my northern nasally voice a little bit and offer some more Midlands dialect and talk about what they've done to kind of flex the playing offer and support those games to continue to play and reduce the number of cancellations. And at the end, although we will stop regularly throughout the session, we'll give plenty of time at the end for some feedback and questions. We'll chuck a few polls in there as well, and I'll ask Alex to unmute every now and again to give me a bit of a break and just to share some of the questions that are coming through on the chat box. So without further ado, we'll get going and look into some of the player feedback and some of the reasons for the campaign. So the way that we try to keep a track on the game, we try and be as scientific as possible, but effectively a lot of the time it's just listening to clubs. I still coach myself, my local kind of adult male side. I also am the under-7s assistant coach this year, which has been the most challenging coaching position of my career so far. But trying to keep connected to the game as best as we can. We measure through kind of 3 different ways about our playing population, and then on top of this, we just have good club conversations with clubs. So hopefully you'll have been involved in a lot of cluster conversations with your club developer or with your CB, just to talk about how things are going at your club. And that's probably the best way to get a feel for the game. But we also try to keep a bit of an eye on some of the more, I'll say scientific, but more the data through our insights team, who do a great job of these kind of 3 key areas. So what we try to do as best we can, we look at what our player behavior is. So we've got our affiliations and registrations. So if you're playing with your first 15, a lot of them will be registered to play. And then we've launched a few pilot CBs about adults being able to affiliate as well. We know that's mandatory for the age grade game now. And some clubs on here may also be aware of the electronic match card data as well. So for every game, you'd submit a match card to tell us who's played and what have you. That gives us an idea about how many people are playing, how regularly they're playing as well. And it allows us to spot some trends in terms of how we can compare year on year. It's not as huge, it's not massively accurate. It's a huge part of the game that don't use electronic match card, but it does give us a bit of a flavour, a bit of a temperature check. We also then look at some of players' attitudes. So hopefully you've taken part in the National Rugby Survey that's been out over the last couple of weeks. We try to do that year on year. And also last season, we also, during the kind of height of the pandemic and worried about players' return, we had a kind of spring retention survey as well that allowed us to pick up on some key trends of what players are thinking in terms of their return to rugby. So we've got a good idea of the trends in participation. We've got a really good idea about what players' wants and needs are in terms of what they enjoy and what they don't enjoy from the game. And we also, for the first time this year, we've run a player panel. Now, this isn't a disciplinary panel that Alex was questioning about earlier on today. We've taken around 100 players and we've put them on like a Facebook group, but a different platform called Recollective, which is like a research page. And we engaged it turned out to about 80 players over the course of the week. And we took some of those attitudes at scale, the findings from National Rugby Survey and some future thinking. And we took them to those 80 players and we engaged them throughout a week over a number of activities, focus groups, interviews, polls, for example, for a full week, and got some real in-depth understanding of what players really like. And And this all together gives that picture of what's happening in terms of the game as best we can, and tries to give us, an understanding of where, we're doing well or where we need to kind of pick up on. And this has led to us thinking we really need to push the campaign. This also led the council who kind of run the game pulled together a task and finish group led by David Roberts, and just tried to address some of the trends we're spotting. And this is where the campaign was born out of, and where the funding came from in terms of trying to address it. So the game's told us, we've listened to the clubs and the CBs, they're told us what the kind of key issues are. And what we're trying to do is listen to that and take a lead in trying to support that in the short term. These behaviour and attitudes at scale and attitudes at depth will give us some long-term issues, but the aim for this is mainly short-term, trying to address some issues of the game. So what do we find? And hopefully this will be really key to listen to what you've said, and hopefully we'll put a couple of polls in soon. That what's the kind of key issue? Obviously the return from the pandemic is going to be really key, but what we found is actually through our electronic match card data that we've got a lot more players, a significant amount of players who are playing less often than they had in previous years. We can see that in terms of number of players only playing one game or two games, and normally there's an average of that, and you can see in common trends across a couple of years. But this year we definitely saw an uptick of the number of players only playing a small number of games. And then we also look at our match completion rate versus scheduled. When we look at that on the last comparative year, on average, we're seeing a 10% drop in terms of that completion rate. Now, when we look at that back in our spring survey data about why players might not play as often, we knew that players said they were really keen to come back. And when we look at the number of players listed on Matchcard, it's very similar to previous years. So it doesn't look like we've lost a huge number of players. That might be geographically different and might be different for your club. But on average, we've not lost a huge amount of players. We've kept roughly the same player number base, but not playing as often. And that's why we're seeing the reduction of scheduled versus completion go down. Now, again, like I mentioned before, when we look at the spring survey, we can see that the things that we're going to stop players from playing were social activities, family commitments, and work. But as part of the task and finish group, we went out to around 50 clubs. Each council member went to around 50, a few clubs each, and asked them, what's the issue? Why are people not playing? And the things we got back were very similar to what came back in the spring survey. People cannot commit to every single week. They're away on weddings or hen do's or stag do's or family holidays that they've not had during the pandemic. So these are the key things we're playing back, and that's something that we want to address using the Six Nations. It'd be really interesting to see from, is that something that's come through? Alex just asked that in the chat. Is that something that has come through from other clubs as well? When we look back at, what can we do to address it? What are some of the short-term actions that we as clubs can do to try and address some of that drop-off and that participation? The things that the National Rugby Survey, in terms of attitudes that would come back, is that what players want from their rugby. What is it that's going to help them come back? What's going to support them? And this is what's come through really key, both in the National Rugby Survey and the player panel, that players are really keen to develop. Like they don't want to turn up for session's sake that lead to a game on the weekend. They want to, see that they're enjoying the sessions and that they have they've made progression and they're being supported to do that. That the session is enjoyable and they're getting some technical and tactical knowledge. Now, this, what was kind of fed back to us at the time, mainly the club saying, well, this is a lot of kind of first 15s or engaged players that have said this already. But when we took this to the player panel with those 80 players, the number of these players who came on the panel, we purposely went out to players who've only played a handful of games. We tried to recruit based on only playing 4 or 5 games. So those infrequent players, we know there's an issue in terms of players not playing very often, but these are the players we brought on the panel. And the key thing that came back from them is about feeling included and engaged in their sessions and their coaching sessions. So our kind of key takeaway from the first part of this webinar is clearly about, is your coaching sessions, and I'm not saying they're not, so please don't jump back at me, but is that, are they a warm, welcoming environment, and have you tested that? Have you checked it? All, we do pride ourselves as a governing body. It's one of our unique selling points that puts us apart from other sports, is that, we are very welcoming. There's a place for everyone. But when we do get into that competitive season, there is a tendency to drift towards what's the outcome on a Saturday that takes priority for a coaching session. And a lot of the time when players are fed back to us, that not feeling included in sessions that are on periphery, that age-old term of feeling like cannon fodder. I spent a lot of my playing career as that person, and I know how it feels. So it's something that, maybe just a quick sense check on, are we including everyone within that coaching session? Are they feeling part of it? Are they encouraged to come down? Do they focus on some of those core skills? And we know that one of the big reasons for people not to play is that either fear of injury or injury itself. So are we dedicating a good amount of our session to ensure that injury prevention is part of that as well? Players want to keep improving, they want to feel valued, and they want to be kept safe. So that's hopefully one of the key things around, what is it that you'd like to do as part of that. Just as Alex, I don't know if you could maybe just, if we've shared that already, that first poll, and just give us an idea of what the kind of match completion rate is for you as in your club. So if you were to list some of the top 2 reasons for games being cancelled or walked over, what would they be? You can choose more than one, but it'd be good to understand that.
Yeah, so that poll's with you now. So what is your biggest reason for cancelled games this season? Give us the top 2, as like you say, you can select more than one on this one before you submit it. We're looking for your top 2. If you can't see the poll for any reason, let us know in the chat. What is your biggest reason for any cancelled games? That's the backup if you can't see it for any reason this evening on the polls. Add it to the chat function there. So I can see, the results are coming in. Just going to give it a bit more time to get a bit more through. So if you haven't done it already, so yeah, Lee, if you can't see it, just let us know in the chat. That's the sort of backup. What has been your biggest reason for cancelled games? Let us know in the chat. Thank you, Andy. I can see that there. So I'm just going to close that poll now, and I'll share those results with you. So player availability has come out as the overwhelming one. Opposition cry-offs, Dave, is the second one in there. And you might want to pick up on a few of those other points. I'll stop sharing that, but very interesting. Over to you, Dave.
Thanks very much. It would be good to, I think like James has put in there as well, and Andy and Lee, please just kind of maybe just give us a bit more understanding of that as well. We talk about player ability. Is it, you talked about injuries there. Is that most common? So if you might put in the chat box there, just give us some reasons on why those players have not been available. Is it because they can't commit to the travel distances? Is it, social commitments that weren't there beforehand? Is it anything else really? Just give us a bit of understanding of what that player availability has come from as well. But, this is really key from our kind of what we're trying to get from our players. And some of the key things when we ask them what they would like from their coaching points, what is it that would make them feel more encouraged to come down to training and get involved? And these are the key things. So this is another task in the player panel. What would encouragement from coaches, what would it look like? And these are the top key things. So really interesting if you within your sessions, do you continually give feedback? We delivered on the Advanced Coaching Award last week, 2 weeks ago, and we went through the same activities. So those who are taking our Advanced Coaching Award, what used to be our level 3, we're asking them about how are they continue to give feedback to players, how can they give guidance, how can they give some specific individual improvements, how can they develop them as teams? And that's something we're really pushing because we know that will lead to a welcome environment. And then hopefully you may have seen the next slide, another kind of just process that we'd encourage you to do. So as we're trying to, that player panel, the reason we're doing for it is to try and bring a player voice into our decision-making opportunities. So as a result of that player panel, we have we've got 2 or 3 players now working on some of our future groups of what the clubs of future might look like. We've fed back in some disciplinary processes. We've taken that player voice and put it in some key decision-making opportunities. And this is something we'd like to promote through this, or maybe you've seen this at all. If you, how well do you do this in terms of trying to retain your players? We know that good businesses do this. So if you're trying to sell the brand or what have you, they'll speak a lot to their customers, understand what they want, and create a connection. And we can do this as rugby clubs. Really, how often do you speak to them? How often do you ask them for input into their into the sessions, into the offer, into who they're playing, how far they're traveling, how many people they want on the field. Try to understand what they want, and also try to understand what they want and what they need. They might want really enjoyable sessions, but they might really need some clear injury prevention schemes that are really, so that's something that's coming through massively on the chat box around injury concerns. So how much of a session is dedicated towards managing injury? What's the provision for physio cover for? Is it just first team, or is it first, second, third, and fourth team? This is the campaign we're looking at here is very much aimed at some of those socially based players. Create a connection, so make them feel welcomed. Think about those key things I've told about what would make a welcome environment, and deliver and continue that cycle. We feel this is a really good way to bring a player's voice into your environment, into your club. So maybe set your own panel up. Be good in the chat box actually. How many clubs have got a player representative on their committees? Be good to hear that. But yeah, that's big things. If there's any more questions on some of that insight, feel free to put it in the chat box now. Is there anything you think that's missing from what we've kind of covered? Is it yeah, they do, but don't want to attend meetings. That's good. Maybe think about different ways to incorporate that voice then. Maybe little, even just like WhatsApp groups and text messages that work really well to free beer. That's definitely one way to do it. But think of different ways to do it. Is it just like a couple of questions that you might send out to a group of players, and you can feed that back into some of those committee meetings if they can't attend? Or sometimes you mentioned their kind of first 15 captain as well for us, but if you've got a second and third or fourth, do you include them in some of the decision making as well? When we look at that match completion rate, that's mainly driven by our merit tables rather than the first 15. So, and some of our lower teams. So it's really important that we're not just including the first 15 on this, we're including the social players, the second, third, fourth. So what we're doing about it, we'll move on to the next part of the webinar. And this is some of the campaign that we're trying to push. So we've got a 4-point plan. It's not as grandiose as it seems, but we're trying to keep it as simple and out there as quick as we possibly can. We're going to try and drive as much demand. So we're going to use our central channels, and I'll go through how we're going to do that in a second, to try and reach out to some of those social players. So our target for this is those players who are either just a one-team club, or play for second, third, or fourth 15, or just into the women's game, for example, or who's players who are driven mainly by the social. We have a lot of players who play competitive rugby, but we also want to support those players who playing just to come down and play with their friends. So these are the type of players that we're going to try and reach through the various channels we'll go through in a second. So we're going to amplify that back in the game campaign, and we're going to use the Six Nations to push the profile of rugby and use that to try and remind players why it is they started playing the game in the first place. We're also going to try and support some of the supply in terms of how we get games completed. So we've talked around trying to keep games competitive, trying to keep games on, making sure we share players. So that's where Martin's going to come in and share some good examples from Staffordshire about how they've done that, and we'll share some other good examples and maybe take some from the chat as well. We've looked at some budget support, so through our CBs, we've made some money available to them should they need to activate some local boots on the ground or some playing opportunities to support clubs in getting games completed. And we're going to try and share as many case studies and videos and stories from grassroots gamers as we possibly can. So they're kind of key 4 things. Now, there's a lot more longer term things that we'll need to do, and we're not disregarding those there. We have a competition review coming up. We've got the women and girls game age banding reviews. We've got lots of kind of long-term stuff in terms of player retention that's happening, but our focus for tonight is mainly on the here and now. How do we get more games completed and less games cancelled? So if you took that section 1, if you look at the back in the game campaign, these are some of the tactics we're going to go through. So we're going to share some content on our England Rugby social channels about players talking about the grassroots rugby, some of the stories of clubs who've kind of got back into the game, and share some short videos kind of highlighting key elements of what the grassroots game is and what it's so special and why it's different, and just try and tap into that kind of emotive side of playing rugby that's shared through all the kind of profile of rugby at the moment. we'll talk a mix between amateur players, but also England players as well. So England players kind of connecting back to some of the reasons why they started, and connecting those to some of the social amateur players and grassroots players who play for the love of the game. And as we have throughout the season, we're trying to ask clubs, and this is somewhere we really like your support in that as well, is connecting up some of your kind of features. I've got good news channels, try of the weeks, games keeping going through adversity, players supporting each other, players who've played, that kind of player who's played every single game for the last 40 odd years. So if you could do that, and we'll make sure we'll share them through the new RFU social media channel, but also our kind of main England rugby channel as well. So that's what we're going to do in that kind of first stage, about sharing those club stories. And again, we're going to really aim at not just the first 15, but also those social players, second, third, and fourth team as well. During the Six Nations, we'll do some stuff around the Twickenham. So the back in the game will be featuring in around Twickenham. There's a lot of people on a match day, but we'll also use some of the kind of pitch side punditry and ads around the stadium just to push that campaign and really try and amplify as much as we can to get him, in the hands of players. And we'll also try and increase the profile of grassroots rugby in the media as well. So we've got our comms team working on trying to feed it into kind of local TV or local papers or highlights reels. So hopefully you may have seen on some of the ITV some grassroots games and tries being shared as part of that. We're trying our best to continue to overcome any hurdles and promote all levels of the game. We'll like to do that also. What we'd also during this as well, we've got hopefully the video about some of those flexible playing ideas. Please in the chat, if you've not seen it, let us know. Peter, you just asked there about, sorry, I can't. I'll try and slow down a little bit in terms of what I said. But what we will do is we're going to promote through kind of Pitch Hero or some of the kind of websites, rugby websites and podcasts, some of those videos about how to flex your playing offer in order to keep games going on, to try and reach as many people as possible. So that's something we're trying to do in terms of that Six Nations, using that elite coverage to promote the community game. What we'll also do is work with a variety number of podcasts. So we know a lot of our players will access their kind of rugby news and content through podcasts or social media. So we're going to work. So hopefully you'll have seen The Good, The Bad, The Rugby run a competition in the last couple of weeks, again, trying to share some of that grassroots footage. And they're going to film, I think tonight, they're going to film another broadcast of the community game special, a bit like Match They, analysing some of that good and bad and rugby, the grassroots game. There's some really good content of there to try and link in and support that as well. BT Sport are also really keen to support, and we'll look to add in segments discussing the grassroots game. A lot of the pundits are still connected and provide some of the content and love for the game, and we'll share them on some of our channels as well. And over the next couple of weeks, we're going to do some filming with Mike Tyndall. So the great thing about Mike Tyndall is still really relevant. He's a World Cup winner. It was kind of handy, but he's also still playing grassroots rugby. Like, he'll still turn up for, I think it's Minchampton first or second 15 in Gloucestershire. So we're going to get him talking about the love for the game, why he's still involved with community rugby, why he keeps playing socially, to try and really reconnect with some of the reasons why, a player's been at the top of his game and won World Cups, is still continuing to play, and what that means for him and his family, and why is that. And we'll share that with kind of regional press and our social channels to share as well. And that's something hopefully you can push also. We'll try and arrange for local radio interviews to try and reach some players in regions, but we might need a bit of support to nudge and remind them of what they've been missing and a part of the team. And then lastly, but not leastly, in terms of what we think will reach players directly, is we're going to work with some of the influencers on social media. So hopefully some of you have seen people like the rugby guy or the rugby trainer, and we're going to ask them to produce some content on their channels that go direct to players, where the rugby guy is really good at reminding people of how great kind of community rugby is, the kind of more fun and social side of things, whereas that rugby trainer may help players in terms of that kind of thinking about how they can prevent injuries or some top tips about how to get back. And we've got, like I mentioned before, we've got some content ready to go through Pitch Hero and Rugby Pass as well. So they're the kind of key elements of the campaign tactics. I realise I've gone through that really quickly as most of the chat. So Alex, I'm going to ask you to kind of step in there, if that's all right, and ask me a few questions.
Yeah, there was one that came out just around the club stories, Dave, and how these stories will reach the players we want to get back at the clubs. Give us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, hopefully, like I've mentioned there, through some of those kind of social media influence, and we know that that's where a lot of players will access through our kind of conversations with them in the podcast. But we've also done, hopefully some of you may be aware that we set, as part of the picture, we set up a social media community page on Facebook to try and get as many social media leads on there as possible. We'll start to add in some more content there over the next couple of days and weeks. But I think if as a, what can you do as clubs to try and get involved in this? I'd say that's a key thing. Once you see that shared on our channels of RFU and England Rugby and Good to Bad the Rugby, all those influencers, most of your players will follow your own Twitter or social media feeds, and that's where we'd really ask you to get involved in those and share as wide as possible, and share your own versions as well. It'd be really interesting to see actually, just what you can do on social media. I think it's one of the polls there, Alex, around, how often do you share training times, pictures of training, seeing some of those social players. That's a real good connection to play. Maybe we could share that one now if you've got that one handy.
Yeah, I'll launch that poll for you now, Dave. So, second poll is just up with you. Do you regularly advertise what training is on at your club? And, thinking about who's it for. Like I said before, if you can't see it for any reason, then please do put your answer into the chat function. So, do you regularly advertise what training is on at your club? Yes or no? I can see, we're sort of up to 60% have completed.
This is one thing I think makes a huge difference. When we looked at some of the motivations for people to do sport. We engage with Sport England and some of their behavioural scientists. Now I'm getting too deep within it. They told us on this one model they use, which is capability, opportunity feeds into motivation. And the capability is being able to play the game, but it's also social opportunity to play. One is actually got the opportunity to know when training is and know when they can go and do training, and knowing that week in, week out, and seeing that week in, week out. So they might know training is Tuesday, Thursday, but they might not know what they're doing. So I might not turn up because I don't really know what's going on today. But if you're regularly promoting, look, tonight we're going to focus on, a bit of injury prevention followed by a bit of core skills. These are the key things that players want. So if they keep seeing that regularly, it might not be the turn up one time, but it might be the second or third time they're seeing it, saying that's key. The other thing is about social opportunities, seeing people like themselves taking place. So if I'm worried about coming back into the game that I've not, I might not have played for a few weeks, and thinking actually it's not for me, I'm not going to be up to speed, but then they see someone they've played with regularly over the last few years, if they can do it, I can do it. That feeds into their motivation. So knowing that they can do it because they love the game, but knowing that something's there for them, and really hammering that pictures of, the second, third, and fourth team doing a touch night or a training session, or feed loads of pictures from the game day to kind of reconnect them. This is what's happening, in the changing rooms, in the social afterwards. If we could keep hammering that message kind of week in, week out on social media, it plays into that. Actually, this is what I'm missing. This is what I'm, fear of missing out. Hammer massively on that. It will change their motivation to come down as well. On there as well, like only on players' WhatsApp groups, is something that's really key. Try and get out there on the social media for those kind of periphery of players. A lot of stuff we do is just aimed at those core participants we know turn up week in, week out. But think of all those past players you've had at your club. Think of all those past age grade players you've had at your club. They'll probably still keep an eye on your Twitter because they've got an affiliation to your club. So, keep hammering them because it might just take a few players from coming over. So thanks very much for that. I think I'll share those results actually. That's a bit of the overview of the campaign. If anyone's got any kind of questions on that campaign, or think there's anything missing, please feel free to add that now as well. Moving on, just in terms of your involvement, Alex has put in a couple of times there. We've got some resources you can see, just you can share. That you can go to England Rugby and download some resources you can use, so frames to make yours look more professional. But keep using those as best we can. So we've got kind of social media frames, posters, kind of user guides as well to tell you what to do. If you do need some support in your social media, please head over to the Facebook group. or just if you want the link for it, let me know. Things we know work really well for player recruitment and retention. One is that give all your lower 15s the same treatment as you do first 15s. I think Waterloo do this really well. I only took the last one I saw really, but they give their second team get the same treatment as their first team in terms of what they do in terms of who's playing, when they're playing, sharing videos of it. I think they do a really good job. We know through actually from the women's game do this really well, a lot better than I've seen elsewhere. But player profiles are one of the most regularly shared things on Spotify, and I was kind of surprised to learn some good news stories on this, where player profiles have just led to really good recruitment of new players. In the fact that they get shared, if your profile comes on, they get shared with friends and family, and that family shares it on and shares it on, and before you know it, you've got other people saying, "Oh, can I get involved as well?" So, if you've not done so far, go down to your second, third, fourth 15s and get a couple of player profiles of the key characters who are there, and they galvanize the team and share their stories of why they keep playing and what have you. I'll be surprised if you don't see really good engagement with that. It's some of the best thing to do. Like I mentioned before, hammer those pictures of training games, let players see what they're missing out on and what they can be involved in. I think it's really good. And any backstories as well. So if you've got players who've not turned up for ages or back, sharing their stories, they'll have had the same concerns maybe of coming back. But if other people see people similar to them coming back as well, they know they can do it as well. And if you share that story along with actually we've got a 3 or 4 week back to rugby session starting in 2 or 3 weeks, a really good use of your social media. We've seen clubs do really well through targeted advertising, so just taking a paid Facebook ad, for example, and saying, put this out to male or female, sporty type people. Again, if you need help to do that, head over to that Facebook page. We'll put a link onto a second. I'm not really good at multitasking, apologies, but I'll put that on the chat in a second. And that's really key. The touch union, our non-contact offer is, I think, for the rest of the season, really key and massive when it comes to summer. Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, but have we got a webinar coming up for the touch union soon?
Yeah, I believe it's the 23rd of February.
Now, I can't hammer enough. I've seen this work. I've seen teams grow out of absolutely nothing just from a club having a really simple summer touch program. So if you've not got a regular club non-contact offer week in, week out, I'd really recommend it's something worth looking at and seeing some of the players are running for you. I know volunteers are under the cosh a lot at the moment, but if it's something that we've seen work really well. So either something you might want to work on for now, just advertising really well. Every Tuesday we're running a touch offer. There's something you can come down, or touch followed by a bit of injury prevention, or injury prevention followed by a bit of touch and a bit of core skills. Some of the key things that players are telling us. But I really recommend looking into summer and getting on that next webinar, because that will really support players coming back into the game, getting ready, feeling confident enough to take on the contact as well. Connecting to that campaign activity, either the competitions or the podcasts. And one thing we'd love is please share your stories. Anything you've got that's players coming back to the game, really good grassroots tries, keeping games on through some adversity, through competition. Anything you've got on some of that really grassroots stuff, please do send that in, or add it in on Twitter. Really would welcome that as best we can. Just quickly on the poll, just let us know if you've already got a non-contact offer. If you could launch that one for us, please.
Launch there. It's with you now.
Someone's mentioned there, Dan, thanks very much on that, on the younger players. That non-contact offer is a really good way to start supporting that transition from age grade to adult. It's something we're going to really focus on over the summer and into September. So the next kind of iteration of Pitch Up will be a lot around that age grade to adult transition. So, for those who are saying haven't got a formal non-contact offer, I know there might be some reason why you're not running that, but it's something worth considering without doubt. Really good family involvement as well. That is something that's really key, and something that social players tell us massively in the panels also is about, how important it is for their family to be included in the club as well. They can come down with either husbands or wives or girlfriends, or to come down with their family and the kids and be involved on a Saturday. One of the big reasons why players say they can't do is family commitments. So if they can manage their family commitments along with their rugby commitments, well, we might keep more players playing more often. I'm going to take a break there. And this is where we're going to look at some of the flexible playing offers. So we know that's our campaign effectively. Just go back a second. They're some of the key things to get involved as much as we can. But we know that's how we're going to try and target some of those players. In terms of trying to keep some games playing, because we know a lot of games have been cancelled or there's been a lot of walkovers. We want to talk about some of those flexible playing offers that we sent in that animation video that we sent prior to the webinar. Also, super happy, I'll come back to that one. Super happy to have Martin on, Martin de Ridder from Staffordshire Rugby Club, Staffordshire Rugby Union, to talk through some of the things that they've been doing to keep games on. Real simple things, that is nothing too complicated in this, but I think the simplicity of it has been fantastic, and we've had some good chats over the last couple of days in terms of what you've been doing, Martin. So, Martin, if you want to kind of share your proper titles, if you've got one.
I was gonna say it probably speaks to it. I haven't really. I'm very loosely sort of. I'm secretary and a second team player at Regional Rugby Club in Staffordshire, so our team is properly sort of at the social level, and just within Staffordshire, I'm in a couple of the CB's groups for organising a couple of the competitions there, but nothing more formal than that. But what I did, and pretty simple really, was just we set up a WhatsApp group and we called it Staffordshire Game On, and it was really sort of very loose WhatsApp group, loose in terms of anyone could sort of join it, and we were pushing people, encouraging people to add to it. It was a lot of fixture secretaries, second team captains, second team players, anyone really. There wasn't really any rules about who could join it or not join it. But then when games were toppling over in the Staffordshire Merit Leagues at the start of the season, we wanted to make sure that that teams were getting put in contact with one another, that was sort of happening instantly, that if one club cancelled on another, perhaps normally due to them not having enough players, that we were trying to encourage, everyone was sort of getting involved in this, sort of players from one of those teams that were short on numbers or whatever going to one of the other matches that was on, and a sort of great sort of chat has been sort of created around that, so that encouraging people to come and play for somebody else on that particular Saturday, because it's in WhatsApp. Almost right up until Saturday morning, people could say that such and such a team needed a couple of players, or they've had some dropouts on the Saturday morning. Somebody needed some players. When it was a club or a second team captain or a fixture secretary looking for a game, the culture quickly developed in there that no one was having any of that nonsense about, we can only play at home this week. We need a game, but we must play at home because we've cooked the food already. Sometimes the people used to say that on like a Wednesday, which I wouldn't want to eat the food that had been cooked on Wednesday or for the Saturday, or we've got the referee booked and all of that sort of stuff. So we just wanted to sort of move away. Like, effectively, the culture is, if you're desperate for a game, the chances are you are going to have to travel.
Martin, just for you, we've just asked there, how many people are involved in kind of league WhatsApp groups and what have you. So it's good, and it's looking like around 6% are not involved. Did you say, you fixed secretaries only, team managers only?
So we sort of wanted to avoid that. I mean, when you get involved in being a fixed secretary, I was for a number of years, you sort of you ring, via ringing someone on a landline. It takes you about 5 times to finally answer the phone, and he hasn't heard yet. He probably hasn't sometimes been down his club for about 5 years. There's quite a few people in fixture secretaries and whatever else that are almost a couple of steps removed from the playing offering of their club. So, and we felt that sometimes matches didn't happen because the communications weren't good enough. So we basically shared everywhere the link for joining this WhatsApp group, which you can do. And yeah, if you wanted to join it, you could join it, you know.
For anyone from the club, kind of like players, captains, managers, things like that.
Players, captains, managers. I mean, fixture secretaries are more than welcome, of course, as well. And I guess that's probably a chunk of the group, but pretty much everyone. And actually, I mean, one distinct group I would say is that there are a sort of number of players who are just looking for a game semi-locally on a Saturday, and they almost don't mind who they play for. And those players are sort of a bit of sort of travelling Wilbury Wanderers type players that were, you know, sort of worth the weight in gold in this current era, because, you know, they will go and almost play for anyone's second or third team. And there probably isn't that many of them, but sort of 2 or 3 of them in any sort of area can really make the difference, and can mean that a team feels like they've got just about enough players to, you know, get a game on, which, you know, has really helped. So, you know, keeping it open to everyone, those sorts of players are sometimes won't know whether they're working or not until the last minute, which might mean they've not been picked for their own first team that day because they didn't know till Saturday afternoon, Saturday lunchtime, and they can jump on and see what's available, and then jump in the car and get to a ground where there's a club in need of a couple of players, which helps get that game on.
And thanks very much to the people who filled the poll and people who put some questions in there as well. Yeah, I'd definitely suggest it. If you're not part of like a league WhatsApp, maybe speak to a few other clubs and just even get one going, because by the sounds of it, it's just really quick and simple, and saved a lot of games from being cancelled last minute. But you talked, when we chatted on the phone the other day, you were mentioning around some of the kind of unwritten rules that kind of get baked into, look, if you're going to rearrange fixtures, these are some of the things you kind of want to consider.
So I mean, we were pretty much saying, look, putting, you know, we just weren't standing for can only play at home. If you want to go in there, and there might be some weeks where team can only play at home, but we were, you know, really sort of, they get the mickey taken out of them. Anyone who said, I can only play at home, the food's ready and all that sort of stuff. We really wanted to sort of not have any of that sort of nonsense, you know, in there at all. And you know, stuff we were having a little bit at the start of the season, games getting called off when there wasn't a referee available, and you know, and again, like we had a couple of instances where like 2 clubs called off a match with like 20 players aside. It was, the enthusiasm was probably there for the playing side of it. Couldn't get a referee and just cancel the game. So yeah, we're sort of trying to, you know, if we can get a ref to one of those places, but also encourage the clubs to say, well, look, let's get you know, in a second team, third team, social level, like get somebody to stand in to referee that game, so at least the game is on. And then another good thing has been sort of post the matches, because there is a bit of chat around it, is you know, increasing and having a bit of chat about what happened, and thanking the teams who supported the other teams and all of that sort of stuff. But I would just say, you can just do this, if you know what I mean, and then spread the word. I mean, if you are in, like a lot of people involved in rugby, you set up a group like this. No one sort of told me from Staffordshire Rugby Union to put it on. I just set it up myself, then dropped it into one of their chats. I'll set this up, and then a load of people, you know, joined in. It isn't almost anything official. And good thing in, say, our area is probably about 30 clubs in Staffordshire, so it's probably like quite a reasonable geographical cluster. But, you know, if the teams that are just on the borders of, you know, Shropshire and into Birmingham and the Black Country, we don't sort of say, oh, you can't join in, and they do really. So it's been good.
It's not something that needs kind of formality towards it. It's just something that we set up at you know, a moment's notice. And a couple of things that come on the chat there. One is that do you have teams trying to poach players, or is it fairly?
I mean, I guess that would be a fear. That would be a fear of clubs. Well, that might be an unwritten rule. As far as I know, that just hasn't happened at all. Again, those sort of players will almost play for anyone, the sort of promiscuous rugby player. you know, they're more playing some of those guys just because they want to play that Saturday and it's quite close to the home. I mean, I guess if there was a period where a club was just not able to get a second or a third team out, and somebody was regularly showing up for someone else, I guess it's possible that might happen eventually, but that's probably a good use of sort of playing resources anyway. But we haven't had any, I guess the term would be used, poaching, because let's be honest, you know, you're 22 stone third team, second row. You know, I don't sure how often people are going to be interested in poaching that sort of player.
You weren't interested when I was playing either.
A bit less than
understandably, some in the chat and empathise with those who have maybe lost players, but I suppose it's not good to see. But the best thing to do is, if you go back to that kind of player retention model at the start, the more you can do to include players, make them feel welcome, make them feel engaged in the club as well. That's as best you can do, and let's hope that clubs support each other in being upfront in that communication. But how many games do you feel that, you know, what's been some of the outcomes? How many games do you feel you kept going? Is it hard? Is it easy?
I mean, sometimes there's sort of lies and damn lies and statistics in rugby, but I would, you know, at a sort of modest level, there's definitely a game or two every single week in, say, Staffordshire, say it's 30 clubs, that wouldn't have happened but for some of that, you know, information sharing. And at the weekend, when there wasn't, I think this was true probably around the country, there wasn't a lot of second or first team rugby either scheduled or, you know, because of the England match, other than rescheduled, cancelled games. You know, even then, that weekend, there was a number of players and said who needs players, and a couple of games that were on, people went and supported it. So, you know, it'd be difficult to really put a number on it, but definitely a couple of games are happening each weekend that wouldn't happen but for it. And across the season, you know, you do the maths, you know, it could be 60 plus games a season are occurring which wouldn't have occurred, which probably helps some of those other statistics and figures.
Yeah, just to recap on a couple of things that I think was key within that as well. Is one was we talked about keep it local. Staff just fairly it's quite good in terms of geography, the number of clubs. So if you are in a bigger area, maybe clustering that up into smaller groups or smaller pockets or that league as well would help. It's that quick and easy communication. I really like the way you said, like, you don't have to be fixed secretary, you don't have to be like a formal person. If you're just involved with that team and you've got an interest, get involved, that you can make some impact and try and keep that game going as well. And it can be quite last minute. You know, you don't have to have everything confirmed on a Tuesday night or something. I like that bit about, you know, clubs kind of baiting the offers. Like, if we're going to ask you to come and play for us, then there's a kind of unwritten rule to say we'll return the fixture, or there'll be a couple of beers in the change room afterwards for the team. Or
that's often stated. Yeah,
I like that as the unwritten rules. It's kind of unspoken things. Someone mentioned around the game on principles is there earlier on in the chat as well. What's your been experience of those? Have they been used?
Well,
you know, sort of.
Yeah, I mean, some of the game on, I think a lot of the game on stuff has happened anyway, and I do think sometimes some of that is, listen, people shouldn't be cancelling games and trying to sort of when for 12 aside, people are always lending. I think that's happened for years at sort of second to third team rugby. I mean, some of the stuff like that where game on, they're saying, like, you know, play 10 aside across the pitch. If you're a second, third team player, low league team player, you know, that's brutal. You don't want to be doing that. And we certainly shortening the match time down to half an hour each way if you haven't got the full number of players. You know, a lot of the stuff that we will do that and encourage our clubs or the teams in our group to do that. I think that does happen. A lot of that does happen anyway. I guess perhaps trying to sort of change that culture around. It's not proper rugby unless it's 15 aside and you've got, you know, front row and substitutes. But I think it's second. That just happens anyway. You know, having a sub is a luxury good, really, at that level.
Or they get told they're a sub until they turn up on the match day and realise they started and playing the full match. But yeah, I think the key was I think game on is a really good way to, you know, it's there for you to use as clubs. You don't need to think on a Thursday, I need to get 15 players, or we can't fulfill a fixture. It's to give you more flexibility. And the key thing I've put down there is that understand what the players want. You're right, not a lot of players want to turn up and play 10 aside across half a pitch, but they might want to play 12 aside with, uncontested scrums, for just 25 minutes each way to feel like they've earned a couple of drinks with their friends after the game.
Yeah.
And that's what the Game On is there massively to support, to ensure that game takes place. But yeah, that's a good point. Martin, is there anything else you want to kind of leave us with, or?
No, I would just say it's one of those things for clubs and people who sometimes sort of, how do they get involved? Just to do. Somebody who's on this call who just might think, you know what, perhaps you just add a few of your mates from some of the other clubs all around there and see if you can. You might be doing it anyway, but share the link for the group around and see if you can help. Get some games on, or get yourself a game, or whatever it is. Really, I'll just say, just get on with it and do it. Really.
And just before you go, and I don't want to kind of steal the thunder of kind of future webinars on this topic, but I've seen Graham just put in the chat there about Colts playing up, and obviously, we've got 17, 18-year-olds playing in as of January. So we talked on the phone the other day, and you mentioned about how Staffordshire have supported some of that transition from age grade to adult.
Yeah, so we've got a Colts transition program which we ran before the pandemic, and then we've relaunched it. Post the pandemic, and this season, obviously, you do need to go through the formalities of the process of getting both your club and if you want them to play adult rugby, you need to go through that process. But in this program, we've got the Colts playing on a Saturday afternoon. And then post Christmas, quite a few of the clubs involved in our program encouraging them to play. The Colts program more or less works out about 2 games a month. So in the other weeks, for them to be playing, for the players who are both of age and approved and they've gone through the process to play on a Saturday, and that has made them in our club 2 weeks ago. That made a massive difference. We did have 3 or 4 subs for the second team, which has been really rare this season. And I think, for clubs to start organising, or really thinking, organising their Colts around with a good view to sort of transition them into adult rugby, is provided all the requirements, and that is something that I would encourage clubs to do, because it's made a massive difference to us. I mean, partly our sort of area and whatever, we don't have that many people going off to university. We sort of lose more to prison than to uni, but it does, getting them involved and passionate, I think has got to be the key for keeping second and third teams going, I think.
Yeah, and watch this space on that. We're going to do some work around the pitch-up programme in September, October next year on that. But just a couple of things you do. You've got the kind of Colts position, but you've also got kind of highlighted weekends in your adult competition. There's transition weekends where the clubs know it's a time to put some young players onto good communication between the two sides. Saying, look, this week we've got a lot of young players, and then hopefully can get a referee who understands that. And you've got 2 teams.
Yeah, no, that really helps. And I mean, because of the rules this season, we then, in its previous incarnation, this will come in again this year, because you weren't allowed to transition people up until after Christmas. What we have done in the past there is then, amongst the teams who are in that programme, have sides which are, specific matches which are amongst the clubs who've got some 17-year-old players, or some 17 and 18-year-old players, as well as the adult players. Again, you do properly have to look into the rules and the guidance around that. We did find that the CB was really helpful, and we had a lot of support in terms of making sure that we were sticking to all of the safeguarding principles and everything else there, which is really important.
Excellent. Martin, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Some real good bits on there. I think the chat box has been lit up a lot during that time. It's been good to read. So thanks for coming on. I appreciate your kind of feedback on that, and good luck for the rest of the season at Staffs. We'll share some stuff hopefully on the chat, Alex, around some of our age grade 12 guidance on that and some of the safeguard issues, but maybe something to talk around with a cluster of clubs in your area or the CB, and just think about how you might work towards some kind of transition events towards next season. Just really, I want to pick up on a couple of points on the chat box there as we kind of finalise the webinar. I'm conscious we're getting towards the hour mark. Just from my point of view, some people have mentioned it there, but there's some fantastic Facebook groups on there around either, finding games, fixture finders, different fixture finders, different game groups or player groups and sharing groups or what have you. So it is worth having a quick look. And if you can't find one for your local area, it might be worth chatting to a few clubs and setting one up yourself. Really quick and easy to get going, and they're working really quite effective. And I can see a few people in the chat box have put some stuff in there as well. Some other things about kind of flexible competitions that are online now on the Game On page. So, how, changing the competition structure. So we've got waterfalls in there. So we try and reduce either travel time or the non-competitive. I'm going to whiz through these slides, but we'll put a link on to the Game On page. It'll be going up soon. And this one as well about a social competition that Sussex have done in terms of, one team hosting two other clubs. So if you've got a short number of players, they're actually, hosting a couple of other clubs on that day and making a good day of it as well. So it's been good to see those going on. Again, there's a lot of detail in there also. So a couple of bits on there. So that Mark said, WhatsApp groups, simple and easy, player exchange, fixture exchange groups, trying to flex your competition off and look at some of those transition stuff also. And that's effectively what we've got covered for tonight. Hopefully given a bit of understanding of, what players have told us and some of the reasons why you might, some of those game cancellations taking part, and hopefully we can address those. An idea of what we're doing in terms of listening to what you said and taking a lead and trying to promote back to players to get involved, what you can do to kind of flex your offer. But Alex, maybe you can kind of help any questions that come to the chat or any further questions anyone's got, please feel free to ask now.
So Dave, there's just there was one earlier on that I think we picked up, which is around the fixture secretary's role.
Yeah,
and, there was sort of a real push around focusing and support and training. Can you just give us a few thoughts on that, please?
Only to agree with it, really. I think you're right. That fixture secretary seems to, it's been a role that's been there since day one, hasn't it? And obviously, before the introduction of leagues and competitions were, a very prominent role within the club also, and would work hard to find, good competition, good games, and have really good contacts with not only the team but also other clubs. So I think it's just a really good point raised, and it's something we'll probably have to have a look at in more detail and see what we can do, and maybe engage with some of those volunteers and see what support they may need. It's something we tried to do for that social media league. We knew about how much they can impact the kind of communication with players, and that's why we set that Facebook group up to try and engage with that group of volunteers. And yeah, maybe we need to do something similar. We'll work with that kind of volunteer department to support that also. What a great point. Yeah, thank you.
I think another one just around a bit of a clarification, isn't it? So there was one question. I think we've got a few one-team clubs. How can players move around if they are registered with a club? If you could just clarify that for us.
Yeah, it depends on obviously what kind of league structure there is in there. There's a kind of the dual registration for students. If you've got students who want to play at different clubs whilst they're at university or coming back, it's worth exploring that, or maybe try and find that link for that now. And then yeah, I think it depends. If you're playing at a certain level, you'll need registration. The lower levels, especially where we're targeting this, you shouldn't really need anything at all, as long as you're playing for a club under the affiliation of a affiliated rugby club. You'll be covered by their insurance. But I think we've shared some links in terms of regulations on that. So if there's any continuing queries on that, feel free to raise a ticket on the club support centre, and we'll get someone to get back to you on that as well. Just picking up Dan's question there, is there any funding from CBs to promote returning to rugby? That's something to pick up with your local CB. They have lots of kind of rugby. They do a great job in supporting as best they can. And I think they've done a fantastic job over the kind of pandemic and the lockdowns and what have you, to keep supporting clubs and engaging and what have you. So definitely worth dropping them a conversation. Or if you don't know the local contact, speak to us and we can pass that on. But yeah, I think they've done a fantastic job in keeping the game and the clubs going. And we've tried to make some support available to them, but we don't know that on an individual basis from now, but definitely worth speaking back to them. Trying to pick up Michael's there. How do they plan to get non-players into the game with a lot of kids who know if it's back into the game? Yeah, it's a really good point. we've got lots of our age grade game seems to be doing quite positively on the affiliation. Again, there might be some local anomalies in that, but for the women's game continues to grow strength and strength. The Inner Warrior stuff we do for them to recruit new players into it is fantastic. And then we're doing some work around trying to, we had our All Schools program that got rugby before the pandemic into kind of 700 schools of non-rugby heritage, you'd say, schools. So the big pull of there. But yeah, Michael, if there's anything you think would be worthwhile, or you need some support on that, or what you think would help you to recruit players locally, feel free to kind of add that in. Thanks for Dan on the Pitch Up for Rugby campaign. Looking forward to seeing you take part next year. And like I say, hopefully we'll have a bit more of a focus on that kind of age grade to adult transition also. Gary, thanks for letting us know on Yorkshire. We'll pass that on to our Yorkshire CB. If you want to drop me an email, if you want a bit more support on that as well, then let me know. I'll put my email address now in the chat box. Oh, I missed it. I'll send it just to Alex. Alex, anything else at all? Any more questions coming in that I may have missed?
I think that's just about covered it for tonight. We've hit the 8 o'clock where we said we'd be. So just to finish up now, please, Dave. And obviously we will have a look at the chat and try and pick up anything that if we need to.
So yeah, I think just final thing for me then is just to thank everyone for jumping on tonight and listening. I appreciate the engagement in the chat. It's been fantastic to listen to as well. Please do keep a lookout for all the back in the game assets. The more you can do to support it through your own channels, you'll reach your players, and they can see they're part of a bigger effort to try and get players back into the game. Hopefully you'll see some of the content come through as you're scrolling through your Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or what have you. If you do need any other support or you feel anything's missing, please do get in touch. But good luck for the rest of the season. Let's hope the Six Nations gets back on track this weekend, and hopefully your kind of match completion sees that a good amount in the rest of the season. But yeah, thank you very much.